Hi, my name is Emeka Warrell, and welcome to Growth is Personal. Each week, I share insights and strategies that will equip you to accelerate your personal and professional growth and bring you conversations that will empower you to thrive in life, career, and business. Okay, welcome once again to Growth is Personal podcast. With me today, I have on the show is Eva. Eva, how do you pronounce Aimable-Kolosko?
It's
Did I get it?
Aimab. It's French. Aimab-Kolosko.
Oh, Eva Kolosko?
No, Aimab-Kolosko. Aimab is French because Saint Lucia was 7 times British, 7 times French. So we
Right.
still have some of the French remnants there.
Okay. Okay. Well, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
I'm excited
I'm
too.
just going to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself, and then we'll jump right into the conversation. For those of us who are going to be watching this on YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button, but also leave a comment what you're going to learn from this episode. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, please be sure to also follow and give us a rating and let us know what you think about today's episode. So we're going to go straight in. Eva, did I call you Eva?
Eva is fine.
Eva is fine. Okay, Eva
Right.
is fine. All right. So Eva, for our guests, our participants or listeners who don't know you, just do a little bit of introduction about yourself, and then so that they can get to meet you.
Well, I can't introduce myself without saying I'm from the beautiful Caribbean country of Saint Lucia. I've been in Canada for about 10 years now. And I would say, how would I describe myself? I would think I would describe myself as the person who people will come to if they want to bounce things and ideas off of. I may challenge things in a very weird way. But I think that's all part of growing and learning and just, not keeping it with the status quo.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, you mentioned St. Lucia. I remember when we started this podcast, and I saw the country popped up as part of our listeners. I was like, oh, I haven't seen this country before, St. Lucia. So when I saw your profile, they're from St. Lucia. I was like, okay, did you maybe your people, or did you tell someone about this podcast or something? But it was kind of interesting to see that that country shows up as a part of our listeners. So,
Yeah,
good.
not that big though. It's like, what, 170,000 people? It's
Oh,
maybe a
wow.
village or a town here in Canada, but yeah, it's congratulations that you had such a big reach. That's amazing.
Yeah, like and they keep topping the chat in the as part of the listener. So I was really intrigued by that. So welcome to the show. It's good to have you here. If you would you start by talking about your background, right?
Mhm.
When we want to understand where people are, oftentimes we want to go back to their story. What is your story to be able to understand where you're coming from and what has shaped you to the person that you've become today?
Yeah. It's interesting. When I think back at my story, I remember my childhood, and maybe that's going all the way back.
Hmm.
But my dad worked with Barclays Bank, no longer Barclays Bank, but Barclays Bank. And we moved around quite a bit. So we moved from St. Lucia, where I was born. We moved around to different towns. In St. Lucia, we moved to Barbados, different provinces in Barbados. And then we moved to Dominica, and we moved around quite a bit. So throughout my life, I've always had a pretty much a nomad lifestyle, I would say. Maintained a normal childhood as a result, and that's attributed to my parents for sure. But it was always difficult, I would say, moving from country to country, from the capital to a small town, and then having to reinvent yourself every single time and make new friends and understanding that. And I think that's probably why you could probably drop me in any situation and I'll be fine, because I've probably just grown up with the fact that I've learned how to adapt myself based on my surroundings. And then, we were back in St. Lucia, we start putting down roots. I realized that the nomad lifestyle, I still long for it a little bit. I probably drive my husband crazy. I'm like, okay, I feel like the itch is here. Like it's 2 to 3 years before we move to a new place or a new house or something like that. And I'm itching to go. Probably drives my husband absolutely nuts. Shout out to my husband. He's fantastic. So to deal with it all the time. Um, but like really when I sat down roots in St. Lucia, and I started my whole career at the St. Lucia Tourist Board. I mean, if you know the Caribbean, travel and tourism is the biggest industry that we have. So there's not one person that can say that they are not somehow impacted by tourism in their life, whether it's through them or their family or something like that. But once I put down roots, I started my career there. I started working at the tourist board. Fantastic place to start my career. I started in research and statistics. And I really liked it. It was really, really great. We hosted events, the big jazz shows there, and it was actually really, really good. And then I was like, okay, I feel like I need to make a change. And so I wanted to do something different. All of my friends were going to the US, to Canada to further their career, to do their masters overseas or even do their undergraduate overseas. And in US and Canada specifically. And I was like, I don't want to be like everybody else. I want to do something different. So I actually applied to Spain. And I moved to Mallorca, to University of Balearic Islands. I don't know Spanish back then. I didn't really know that much of Spanish. I could read it a little bit just by watching HBO Ole, which is what you get in the Caribbean, Latin American HBO. And so I could read it a little bit just by, following along in the subtitles. But I didn't really know Spanish. And yes, that was terrifying. But I remember the day that I actually decided I'm going to do this. And I went on Amazon and I ordered a winter jacket because, of course, in the Caribbean, why would you ever need a winter jacket? And I remember my mother opened it up and she's like, what is this? And I'm like, remember I told you I was going to Spain? And I remember, and will stay for me forever, I remember her face just like falling and like, you were serious? It's like, nobody in Spain. What are you doing? And I was like, I want to do something different. And so I remember moving to Spain, not really understanding the culture. I remember there were so many kind Spanish people that actually helped me with my Spanish along the way. I got a few Spanish boyfriends, that helps too. And then, really that helped me just understand the Spanish culture. And it was honestly a fantastic journey and an opportunity because I met people from all around the world. It was an international program. And then during that time, I actually applied for an internship in the UK at World Travel and Tourism Council. It's a global nonprofit organization in travel and tourism. And I applied for an internship when I was done with my master's. I moved to the UK. Again, I like to move, as you can tell. And I moved to the UK, and then I loved it. It was a great experience. I got to work in so many different countries, doing so many different things, meeting high-level people like CEOs of multinational companies, presidents of multinational companies like Marriott, etc. Met them, actually were able to talk to them. I mean, I was young, so actually having that kind of exposure is really, really big. I was able to do events with now the King of England. And he sponsored one of the initiatives that I was working on, and meeting him and being in his personal residence, that was actually an amazing part. How many people actually get to do that? And having to, curtsy and everything, and them coming, giving you instructions on what you can and can't do. That was a surreal experience for this girl from a tiny little Caribbean country, right? How often does that happen? And I remember just being so blessed by the fact that I had been afforded all those opportunities. And yes, I always say that those opportunities were actually afforded by other people. But honestly, if I hadn't got in and said, okay, I'm going to look for these opportunities, I want to do something more, I want to, put myself out to do something scary and unknown and challenging, then those opportunities would never have presented themselves, right? I would have just been in St. Lucia or just did exactly what I need to do and just gone back home instead of challenging myself in a different direction.
Mm,
So that's why I always tell people, like, really, sometimes you got to put yourself out there, even if you don't know what you're doing, or if you think you're destined for something bigger and better, go for it, right? Nobody's gonna create it for you. You got to create it for yourself.
mm,
And I met my husband in the UK. And then we were like, okay, so we don't really want to stay here for the rest of our life. I love British.
mm,
I love British people. I love London. I loved it. It was great social life. But to raise our family, we didn't want to stay there. And we're like, okay, so where should we go? And we're like, okay, never met a Canadian we didn't like. Let's go to Canada. And because we were thinking about, should we go to the US? Should we go to Australia? Like, we're just thinking about all the English speaking, countries. And so we were like, okay, Canada is it. I'm lucky I actually have an aunt who lives here. So I was able to, she really helped me tremendously in assimilating, and just having someone to go to and saying, just in the beginning, it's daunting moving across the ocean and not really knowing anybody per se. But she was fantastic, and her family was fantastic in helping me assimilate. And I feel for people that don't have that, like that must be tremendously hard.
yeah.
Um,
Yes.
but and I've been in that situation before, so I remember that. But I mean, moving with my young 3-month-old son at that time, and my husband, that was really, really hard. And when we got here, it wasn't easy finding a job, right? I remember just being so frustrated that everyone kept saying, you don't have Canadian experience. You don't have Canadian experience. And I remember thinking, I just went through all this international experience that I have. And I'm thinking to myself, that's not good enough.
Mm,
Why? What's so different and unique about not having Canadian experience? And it was interesting. One of my best friends, truly respect the guy, one of my mentors, he told me sometime after, he's like, that's just a cop out. People just say that because they don't want to give you a chance. Right.
mm,
And I was like, okay, thank you for a Canadian being honest and just saying that, right? Like, shout out
mm,
to him for doing that. But I just remember being so frustrated, and then I went to essentially, I started looking for contracts. I started, getting involved in a whole bunch of, charity work. I wanted to make sure that I was showing people that I wasn't sitting on my laurels. I was getting out there. I was doing things. And so I found that incredibly rewarding because I got to, help people, which was amazing. But also I got some of the Canadian experience and more of the assimilation into the culture. I joined project management institutions because I'm a project manager. So, I use that to network, and then just started to, hit up people and literally I went through all the list of companies I wanted to work at. And I started just randomly and emailing people, like, the top directors. I will tell you, some of the people, what they came back with was not actually quite nice.
mm.
And then we're like, stop emailing me. Why are you emailing me? And, I'm like, that's kind of not really nice, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, for God's
Right.
sake, somebody's reaching out to you, at least say, oh my gosh, would love to have a chat. So whenever people reach out to me and they're like, oh, I need help, I always make the time, even if it has nothing to do with me or nothing to do with, what I'm working on, or the company I'm in. I'm always make the time to just give them, even if it's 5-15 minutes of my time, to say, okay, have you tried this? Have you tried that? And so I remember just being rejected a lot. And then what actually happened was I found a contract, and it was with a boss that was actually Australian. She was actually working in the US. So she didn't have any of this no Canadian experience, bias, I would call it, right?
Mm, mhm.
Um, and she was able to give me a chance. And then my career just grew from there.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. I mean, one of the things, the highlight of what you just said was the fact that opportunities will not come to you. You have to go out there and begin to create your own opportunity. And I think it's very key because a lot of times we see new immigrants come in, and one of the conversations that I always hear them say is, well, they invited us into this country and they're not creating the jobs for us. Like, the
Mm,
system is this and the system is that. I understand that is that there could be some, loopholes or whatever in the system, but you would have to be able to get to the point where you take ownership of the opportunities of your own future and create those opportunities yourself. So that's a great one. I won't go into this question around why. When I looked at your profile, one of the things that stood out for me was that you were someone who is big on asking why. So if I was to ask you, what is your why? What would that be?
What is my why? So my why, and I think about who I am at the core, and I think I've done a lot of self-reflection. I've done a lot of self-awareness work, and honestly, I would encourage everyone out there to just become very self-aware. And the way to do that is by talking to people that know you the best. They will, if they love you, they will give you the feedback that you need to hear, whether or not you want to hear it, right?
Hmm.
And if people really believe in your personal development and your growth, they will be that person. And I always tell people feedback is a gift. It's a
Hmm.
gift you won't like to hear in that moment, but
Right.
honestly, it helped me understand what my why is,
Hmm.
right? And for me, my why is I want to be someone that helps people and people go to for advice. It's interesting. I don't know if you've ever heard of Marcus Buckingham,
Yeah.
but
That
he
sounds.
has he's fantastic. I would encourage anyone to read anything he writes. But he actually has profiled people based on an actual personality assessment. And mine was stimulator and advisor. So what that means is I'm very attuned to energy. So, I can look at somebody, whether they're on camera or in person, and I can read off their body language. I can tell when they're hesitant, and I know how to adjust to that, right?
Hmm.
And from an advisor standpoint, it means I always have an opinion, whether or not people like it or not, right?
Hmm.
Um, so when I think about my why, I think about at the core of me being an advisor and the core of, me understanding people, I'm always asking, why do they do this? Why are they doing it in this way? What's driving them? And so for me, like, I'm driven by the deep understanding of trying to connect to people or trying to understand people. Because for me, like, if you don't have people around you that will help you be successful, or you can help be successful, then I just don't know what we're here for, right? So,
Hmm.
for me, it's the why is for me is about helping people along their journey, and particularly for me right now in my life, like I've gotten to the point in my career where I want to help other people succeed. I want to help new immigrants succeed because I remember how tough it was.
Yeah.
And I want to help women succeed. I want to help women climb the corporate ladder because it's not easy sometimes. I've been called all kinds of things. I've been called ambitious. I've been called too passionate. All the micro aggressions along the way, and I'm like, if I was a man, no one would tell me this, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
so for me, it's very much around helping people succeed is my why right now.
Hmm. Yeah. So I want to take you on one of the things you said, especially, we talk about, knowing your why, but sometimes people get questioned about their why. Like,
Mm.
have you got to the point where people question, and you mentioned something around people saying things like you're ambitious and you're too passionate and all, but have you at some point questioned your why?
Yeah, I mean, when people have called me too ambitious, I actually started to doubt myself and said, "Oh my gosh, am I being too aggressive? Am I being too ambitious?" And then you know what? I talked to other people. The same guy that told me, about Canadian experience. I talked to him about him. He's absolutely the person I lean on for great career advice. Every time I have to think about a job, I call him, right? Like he's the
Mm.
person that helps me weigh this out. And I would say that really what happens is that I really had to think to myself, why are you letting this bother you? Why are you even listening to them? There will always be people in your life that will believe that you can't do it, right? I mean, we've all been there, right? Where people have said, "Hey, you can't do it. You won't be successful. You won't ever amount to anything much. I mean, I've had uh, tons of people growing up that have told me that, especially when I moved from country to country, having to always meet friends, and sometimes people were not so nice, right? So I think, from that point, I just had to say, why am I so concerned about what other people think? People are always going to think what they think, right? And I can't stop that. There will always be people that will support you, and there will be people that may not want to actually see you succeed. And sometimes they're threatened by you, right? It could come down to that. So I literally had to say, why do I care right now? I will be who I want to be, and I want to be true to myself and authentic to myself. And you know what? Somebody will turn on and say, I love your ambition. That's the person I want to be around. I want to be around people that are hungry. I want to be around people that are humble. I want to be around people that are hardworking, and I want to be that myself.
Hmm. Has this why have you seen any impact it has made in the lives of people around you?
In terms of
In
in
terms
terms of
of, being understanding your why drives you to do what you do. Have you seen and have you seen the impact of, with those around you, especially, people in your workplace? Do you think
Yeah,
it has made an effect on them?
yeah. I mean, I think for me, I'm always making opportunities and connections with people. And it was interesting. I've just started a job. I've been in there less than a year. And I have people reaching out to me, just wanting to have lunch with me, just wanting to have coffee with me. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back. And I always make the time because I remember that there were women along my career path that actually were there for me, actually gave me advice, actually helped me along my career. I always tell people I didn't get to where I am without standing on the shoulders of other women, because I did, right? I stood on their shoulders. And so, really, I tell people my story all the time, and I tell people, hey, like, reach out to people, think people that you may not even think would give you the time will. So, for example, when I first started my whole leadership career and I noticed that I had a gap in financial management, I actually wanted to tighten that gap closely. I'd never managed a P&L before. I'd never been a leader in that way before. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, who could help me with this? And you know what? I went to the CFO of the company, of like 10,000, maybe 50,000 people globally. I actually went to the CFO, who was another woman, and I said, didn't know her. I had probably interacted with her once or twice through email on a committee that we were on. And I was like, you know what? I have this gap. Can you please mentor me? And I remember that in itself. Remember, I told you about creating those opportunities? That's
Mhm.
one of those ways you create opportunities, right?
Hmm.
Because no one, honestly, I've never met anyone that says, no, I don't have time for you. Like, people always genuinely want to help you, right? Like, I think that a lot of people talk themselves out of it and think,
Yeah.
oh, they're too busy, they'll never help me. Any person in their career who's a leader has had a mentor or mentors that have helped them along the way, and
Hmm.
they're always willing to extend and pay that forward,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So I think don't let that don't talk yourself out of it, is what I would tell people. And I reached out to her, and she was like, oh my gosh, I would love to help you. She didn't really know me from Adam. And you know what? I had to present a P&L to her one point in time, and I failed miserably at it,
Mhm.
to the point where I beat myself up for days and days and days around the fact that I just failed in front of a CFO of the company that I work in. Like, how embarrassing is that,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And you know what? I've failed many, many times in my career, I'm not gonna lie. But I let myself wallow in it for a second, but then you know what? I pick myself back up and say, okay, that's never gonna happen to me again. And I'm going to make a plan to get out of this, right? So this is where you create the opportunities. Sometimes you fail when the opportunities are right there, but you
Hmm.
gotta pick yourself back up and do it again, right? And
Hmm.
you gotta learn from that failure.
Hmm. That's a very key point there. Um, because people are afraid to go after opportunities because of the fear of failure, right? But when you understand that failure is part of the process for you to become
Part of
better,
growth.
right? That's how
Yeah.
you learn. That's the lessons you
Mhm.
pick along the way, right? So that's very key. Let's talk about your career in operations. One of the things I picked from your profile was the fact that you are involved in operations. So what inspired you to go into operations, and what are the
Mhm.
lessons you've learned along the way?
Mhm. Well, I will tell you, I'm a person that's driven by efficiency. Like, I, when I wake up in the morning, I literally make my mental plan of how I'm going to get from the second I get up in the morning to the end of the day, right? What do I need to finish? What do I need to accomplish? I make that plan every morning. And I always make my bed every morning. Drives my husband nuts. But to me, that I've always read like all the successful people. And I think that's what made that switch in my head. All successful people make their bed in the morning. That's one
Mm,
of the traits, right? It's
mm,
because you want to start the day with one success. Making your bed in the morning is a success. Like just everything that you check off your box is a success,
mm,
right? So I make my bed in the morning, and I really am driven about how do I get from that point to the next point in the most efficient and optimized way. And so it drives people insane, including my husband. But I am driven by efficiency, and operations at its core is about efficiency. And I love designing processes. I love talking to people and understanding, going back to the why, understanding why is it happening this way? Like, why are you doing it like that? Like, you have to understand the why behind why people are doing what they're doing and the way that they're doing it, because honestly, there's probably a reason,
mm.
right? Or
Yeah.
they may not have been challenged differently before. But understanding the why, so you could get the current state and understand all of that. And then you need to start thinking about, okay, how do I make this better? How do I align people or teams or clients or processes better, so that we can get to a more optimized outcome? And so honestly, I love process setting. Visio is my most favorite program ever. If no one knows Visio, if you like process mapping and you like setting processes, you have to learn Visio.
Hmm.
But really, it's just a level of thinking. And you know what? It's interesting. When I was in Spain, and we were playing Spin the Bottle, which isn't where you think it's going to go, but we were playing Spin the Bottle, and we were supposed to say, okay, spin the bottle, and when it actually lands on you, you have to do truth or dare. Okay, so then it's spun on me. People had gone around. It's spun on me, and I got the bottle pointed towards me, and then I was just thinking for a while. And then somebody's like, "Why are you thinking so much? Like, what are you thinking about?" And then you know
Mm.
what? My best friends at that time at school, you know what? It's because she's thinking if she does this, then this is going to happen. Or if she does this, then this is going to happen. And I was like, oh my God, she actually knows that. I didn't realize that somebody knew me that much, right?
Mm, mm,
That's what operations is. Like, literally, it's about if you do this, this is going to happen. If you do this, this is going to happen. And then you just start to think about how do I pull the levers so it could go in the direction I want it to go.
mm, mm. Would you say that is a gift, a talent, or is it something that you had to develop over
I
time?
think all talents are potentials until you develop them and you
Mm,
nurture them. That's when they truly become talented. There's tons of talented people in this world that never live their potential, right?
mm,
Because you haven't nurtured it, you haven't developed it. So I would say that yes, it is a talent. I don't think everyone thinks the way that I do. If they did, we'd probably all walk around murdering each other. Just saying.
mm,
Um, but like really, I do think talents, if you recognize your strengths, and
mm,
I always tell people you have to, going back to that self-awareness that I talked about, like you have to know what your strengths are, and you have to be self-aware enough to recognize those strengths. There's tons of resources out there that can help you do that. And once you know what it is, you need to spend the time nurturing those strengths, because I read tons of books. I don't just, when I commute to the office, I have Audible, and I have like tons of books going at the same time, depending on what I feel like listening to at that moment. Right. But I would say that I truly you really have to take the time to, once you identify your strength, and that's super important, then you need to take the time to nurture it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's powerful to nurture it. Now, what have at any point in time these potential, no, not potential now, but you've been able to develop this way of walking through things and developing processes. Has it at some point stand in the way of change?
Mm. As in, have have okay. Yeah, there have been times where, here's the thing, change is scary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Especially if you remember I told you that they're doing it exactly the way they used to do it. And there's a reason why they've done it, maybe, or they've just, nobody's trained them in the right way, that they've tried to figure it out on their own and they just keep doing it. And they bring on more people and they train them in the way that they know how to do it. Not necessarily the right way, but it's just the way they know. Right.
Mm.
And there have been times where I've had to change processes. And you have to be mindful of how you change it, and who you bring along the journey with you, right? Change is scary. Some people will tell you, I welcome change, I love change. The second you introduce change, I hate this. This is so bad. Why are we doing this? This makes no sense. It will never work, right?
Mm.
Like,
Hmm.
so these things do happen because honestly, like, we're comfortable. Whenever we're comfortable, when somebody says change this, automatically you're like,
Mm. Mhm.
everybody goes through that, right? I think, and not to say that I've done it perfectly every single time, because again, I fail at things, but I've learned, right? I would say that you kind of just have to think about all the things that will go wrong. You talk to them. If you are doing a big change in a big group or a big department or a big team, recognize who are the people, the key change champions, or the people with the most influence. They may or may not even have a title.
Mm.
Most times they don't come with a title,
Yeah.
but they are the people that when they speak, everybody goes and they listen and they follow along, right? So those people, you got to pull them aside and you got to make sure that they're part of that change.
Right.
You got to make sure that they're inputting. You have to make sure that they're championing it, making sure that they're able to advocate. If you can pilot something, pilot it, hold them as one of the change champions. And this is a project management principle. Have your change champions. And then, you bring them along with you and you spend more time communicating and actually connecting with them than you do with everyone else. And that will help you, like, bring forward that change. And they can also then explain to the people, because sometimes it's a very detailed process that needs to change. They will then say, okay, this is how it made it work for me, or this is, oh, remember when you did this, you have to do this now. So they can bring in all the details that you may not necessarily have as someone coming in operations.
Mm. Awesome. You're a leader. So let's talk about how you um, build and maintain strong relationships amongst your team members. How do you as a leader build and sustain relationships amongst your team members? How do you do that?
Mhm. It's interesting, right? I will share with you something that is very raw for me, right? Like, I haven't always been the best leader, right? Just call it out. I haven't always been the best leader. Because honestly, every company that I've been in some companies where honestly they talk about engagement, they talk about employee engagement, but they don't truly believe in it.
Hmm.
Right? And yeah, corporations are corporations, right? Businesses are businesses. We do really want to engage people, and some companies believe in it more than others, right? But I would say that the companies I was with in the past, they were more corporate, bigger companies, more corporate. Didn't necessarily, I would say, not. I think that it wasn't that they didn't believe in engagement. It just wasn't, I would say, one of the key things. It was mostly about driving the business, driving the metrics, driving the financials, driving the
Right.
numbers, right? And you always know companies that truly believe in it when it is a metric that you're measured against, right? And I went to the organization I went to recently. It was an HR organization. And I remember having to change my entire style of leadership because I grew up in corporations where employee engagement was never a metric that I was measured on, never a metric I was bonused on, never a metric that, they truly, really believed in, I would say, because again, you kind of have to put your money where your mouth is, right? If it's one of your top metrics, then it should be part of where you measure your leaders. So, I think the important thing is that I learned how to adapt my style. And did I do it brilliantly when I went into the next company? No, I failed at that horribly, right? But eventually I realized what I had to do differently, and I had to learn how to adapt my style of leadership. I had to learn how to be more humble with people, more raw, more authentic. I also had to learn how to manage through COVID, and I had to learn how to, do different things, right? But I wouldn't say that I was successful with every single person. I was successful with some people. Other people were tougher nuts to crack, and to this day, never was successful there. However, you know, I've learned from it, right? And I've learned from where I failed. And now that I'm in my new company, I've made steps to actually make sure I don't repeat that. And I just make sure I show up as myself authentically all the time, make sure that, people know who I am, make sure I share more of my personal world, where I came from, and where the companies I grew up in, you kind of leave that part of your life outside of your work life. But now I've realized that people want to know you, they want to know the whole you, right? And then you really need to be open around what you're thinking, what you're feeling. If you're having a crap day, call it out as having a crap day. And people understand that they all have crap days, right? Like we all do. But I think it's important to just show up as yourself, because people will know when you don't, right? And I think that's the important thing that I've learned, is just being true to myself, and just and knowing that honestly I am here as a leader to help people achieve their personal development, their growth, their engagement. Like that's what I'm there to do. So I've had to change my leadership style, and I honestly think I thank my last company for really helping me grow as a leader. I think it really, really did.
Hmm. Showing up as your authentic self and being true to who you are. Have you found any setback to that? Like, have there been any flashback, or being, because being authentic makes you vulnerable, right? People
Yes.
now would know some things that they probably shouldn't know, but because you are true to yourself, they can see you as a clear glass. But has there been challenges being your true self, and how have you been
Well,
able to overcome it?
sometimes I curse too much. That's part of being my authentic person, right? And then I just have to be cognizant of the platforms and audiences that I do that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Sometimes, being my authentic self, like, um, there is a balance between being your authentic self and being a business leader, right? There are times where, yes, you can be authentic, but you have to also know that there are certain things you can and can't say,
right,
and share too much information, although because you want people to like you and you want people to be, authentic. You want to be authentic and you want people to like you. Like there have been times when I've shared a little bit too much than I should have, right? And that was me just trying to, connect with people. But then I realized that, oh gosh, maybe I shouldn't have said that in that way. Maybe I should have showed up in that way. And so particularly where words mean so much, you really want to be, balance that with, being a business leader, because there is that line that you have to, and that balance that you need to strike.
yeah, yeah, and it happens because I've had different leaders say differently how they try to be authentic, but sometimes they have to know where to draw the line, and
Yeah.
so that they're not seen as, I don't think there's anything like over authentic, but anyway. Now let's
No, I mean more people might think, oh my gosh, you don't want to come off too desperate, right? Like you don't want to look like you're looking for friends per se,
Mm.
right? Like you have to balance. It's a fine line to walk between being authentic and actually, being a solid business leader.
Right. Okay. This next question is around leading through challenging times, right? We've
Mm,
had as a leader, we just left COVID, and now we're having different changes happening in the workplace.
yeah.
What strategies do you use to lead during challenging times?
I think COVID challenged everybody, and we're still feeling the remnants of COVID, just in different ways, I would say, right? I think it's challenging times have been around for as long as we've all been around, right? As long as humans have been around. I think the world has, or our generations have not seen anything like COVID. So none of us knew what to do. I don't know anyone that says,
Mhm.
I crushed that,
Mm,
right? Like, I don't think any leader said, I crushed that during COVID.
right.
I challenge them if anybody said that, truly. But I think during that time, you just gotta again show up as yourself and tell people, hey, I'm struggling too, because we all were struggling. We had to be like tough and be strong for our people, but we were all struggling. And I am really blessed that I have a tight knit group of other leaders like myself who we come together and we're still friends to this day because we managed through COVID together. Which honestly, now you're kind of like a band of brothers. You feel like you've fought a war together and you're going to stick together because you've now leaned on each other and got each other through it, right? So I'd always encourage people whenever you have challenging times, find your band of brothers, right? Because there are other people going through the same thing that you're going through. It may not necessarily be in that company,
Mm,
maybe out in that industry, but find that band of brothers and just share tips and lean on each other in that way. You honestly, we'll all be better for it, right? For sure.
mm,
So I would say that honestly, like the different challenges that we're seeing right now in the workplace are around, now a lot of these companies have invested in space and have leases that are still going on. If you have a long-term lease, and you want people to be together because honestly, like the culture and the buzz and the vibe that comes with people coming together. Although you try to recreate that in a hybrid or you create that in a virtual environment, it doesn't quite connect sometimes. So there's always that balance to be fought between, you know, people have had to rearrange their personal lives during COVID, and everybody got used to working from home. You don't want to take away that flexibility that has been actually developed in that new schedule that's been developed during COVID. But you also want to make sure that you're beyond the work, that people feel connected back to each other. Because honestly, at the end of the day, if you don't feel connected back to your teams, if you don't feel connected back to your colleagues or to your company on a whole, then what keeps you there, right? You could be
mm,
working in any company anywhere in the world, right? So you want to make sure that you create that culture that people are connected to. You have to create those connections.
mm. But how then do you identify what what culture syncs with everybody? Like, how do you identify what people like in order to be able to
Yeah,
create what the kind of
yeah.
environment? How do you do that?
That's a great question. I don't think there's a magic pill, quite frankly, right? I just don't think there is. I think there's different types of cultures. There's team culture, there's organization culture, there's the individual themselves. I think you have to recognize that there's different levels of cultures, and you
Mm,
can't say, okay, this is going to be our organization culture. It needs to be in the people you hire. It needs to be in the people you associate with. I always tell people when I recruit, I look for three things. I look for hungry, humble, hardworking.
mm,
That's my two things, right? Everything else can be taught in, right?
mm,
So, and one of my previous leaders in another company, always drill that in: hungry, humble, hardworking. And I take that because you know what? He's
mm,
so right.
mhm,
That is so important because if somebody's hungry, they're gonna work hard, they're going to learn, they're going to, drive it forward. If they're humble, you know that they're going to want other people to succeed. And that's who you want as a team player and a colleague in that band of brothers. That's who you want along
Hmm.
your side. And then hardworking, you want to know that you can depend on people, that you're gonna, they're gonna be the people that will be able to push things forward and drive the teams and connect the teams, right? So, I've learned that this is honestly, you got to start there. Everything else builds up from there, right?
Right.
And the organization as a whole needs to believe that, needs to center themselves around that, and needs to create those as key values. And then I would say, leaders have to be connected to people, have to walk around and see who's here, who's not, have to call people and say, how are you doing? Like, you know what I mean? Like I
Hmm.
connect with my team in some shape or form every day, whether they report to me directly or not. I just say, hey, how are you doing? Call them, there's an issue going on, like, or, hey, just wanted to see how your dog was doing or your kids were doing. Like, I think that's super important. I always make that time every single day, some shape or form, to connect with my team.
Hmm. Hungry, humble, hardworking. Which of these three is most important to you?
I think they're all important. But honestly, I feel like people need to be hungry, right? Like I also think if you're if you're overly hungry and you're not humble, that's a problem,
That's a problem. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And if you're overly hungry, not humble, you're not hardworking, that's also a problem.
Mm.
Because I mean, no one has ever gotten to where they want to get to without working hard and also giving up stuff, the sacrifices. As a leader and my progression throughout my career, I had to give up stuff. I had to give up time. I had to, do whatever I needed to do, sacrifice whatever I need to sacrifice to still finding a balance with maintaining my family, right? But there have been times where, we've all had to sacrifice things. And every leader that you'll ever know in any measure of success would tell you that they've had to sacrifice things.
Mm. Yeah. That's a good point. You can, because why I asked the question is, we have in today's Gen Z, and we're going to bring in the Gen Z. You can just talk about, oh, they're so I think you can describe them as more of hungry, right? And they say they're less humble. And some of them so when you're trying to lead people in that, because now we're going to have more of this kind of people in the workplace, because we have the baby boomers and all who are going to be retiring
Mm,
very soon.
yeah.
How do you lead people who are hungry and maybe they're described as not humble? What do you do in that case?
Yeah. I think I want to just preface something and say being humble doesn't mean that you can't shout from the rooftops of your achievements,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
I think the important thing to know is people need to know that you're doing things because let's face it, some of the people that get promoted are the people may not necessarily be the most hardworking people, but they're the ones that are making sure that everybody knows around them that they're the one that made that happen,
Mm,
right? Like, so you
mm,
have to be an advocate, you have to be a good communicator to move forward. I think what's the part about humble that's super important is that realizing you didn't get there on your own. You had your team, or you had other people that you worked with to help make this happen. I wouldn't say that Elon Musk got to where he got to all by himself. Like there were other people that supported him along his way. And so I think being humble is about stopping for a second, recognizing those people and saying, I couldn't have gotten here without you. Like that's being humble. You don't have to not be humble and not, communicate your strengths and communicate what you've achieved. You have to communicate what you achieve because people need to know what you've actually achieved. Otherwise, if the tree falls in the forest, we don't really know that it happens, right? So you really want to think about finding that balance between giving people the recognition that they need because they helped you, and also letting people know that, hey, I did this and look at that, isn't that fantastic,
mm,
right? So you have to find that balance. And I would say, like, for the younger generation that are coming up that are not humble, I think there's things you can coach in, right? I think No one, no one comes fully baked. I didn't get to where I got to in my leadership career being fully baked. Again, I've stood on the shoulders of really good leaders and people that have helped me along the way and people that I learned from or tried to emulate or, just took a page from their book. Like I literally had to recognize who I wanted to be and who I wanted to become. And I had to think about what do I need to change about myself to do it. And honestly, am I done? No, there's tons of things about myself I want to work on, right?
Mm.
And I think that's the important thing about being a self-aware leader. You have to recognize that, and you also have to let other people who are honestly have your best interest at heart give you feedback, and you got to seek it out. You got to take it, and it'll hurt in the moment, but you'll take it on and make the change, right? Because even if you got the feedback and you didn't change, there's no point of it. You got to change. So I would say that for me, it's about, coaching. It's about, showing people that we win together as a team or we fall together as a team. That brings in the humbleness because they will then understand that, really they won't get there on their own. Or sometimes you connect people with different, I would say one strength, one weakness. So if I know somebody is strong in one area and I know another person is actually not that strong in that same area, I pair them together or I get them to work together as a group. I force little marriages if I can, right?
Mm.
So, of the sharing of minds, I think that's super important. And that actually creates connection back to people. That creates, hey, like, I didn't just get her on my own. I couldn't have done it without you.
Great. How do you then measure hard work? Because I've seen in organizations
Mhm.
where you see some people who, they show that they're hardworking, but they're not actually working, right? The saying they say, are you hardworking or are you hardly working? So as a leader, how do you ensure that you have a team that is hardworking and is true to that, you know, um, truly hardworking, right? Because
Yeah,
you don't want to reward people. Sometimes they say it's either result over effort, right? You can put all the
yeah,
effort, but if you're not bringing results, there has to be that balance. So how do you measure hard work?
yeah. I think, corporate me will tell you I have all the metrics in the world to tell me, right?
Yeah.
Not that I say that we all do. I think there's a qualitative piece to this, right? So you have to be connected to your people. You need to give them, deadlines, you need to give them, initiatives, you need to give them scope that they need to manage to. And you need to essentially say, okay, I need this done by this date, right? So and what I always encourage my team to do is say, okay, if you're unsure, let's talk through it, right? If you want to start it off and then, just don't go down the path too far, just say, okay, this is the frame of how I'm thinking I'm going to tackle this. Does this feel right to you? Yes, I would love that because then at that point I'd be like, oh, that's not really what I was thinking. Or I'd be like, okay, and yes, and let's do this, right? Or yes, but let's do this, right? So I think it's super important for people to just stay connected to their people, give them, measurable, outcomes and initiatives and targets and dates, and then you will know if they hit it or not, right? Because if you give them on this date and it isn't delivered, barring something happening, which honestly, people are people, they have situations that happen. You have to be mindful and empathetic to that. But like, if they are not hitting the deadlines, then you have to stop and say, because I've had people on my team that have not necessarily delivered what we needed to deliver. And always, the first question I ask myself, is it me? I always ask my question, maybe I didn't define it right.
Mm.
Maybe I didn't give them support they needed. Maybe I was not clear as to what I needed. But then if I know that I've, written it out and I've communicated and, I've given you all the steps and the support you need and people you might need to help you get there, or at least giving you direction, then I might have to ask the question, is there something else going on here? Right. And so that's where you kind of really have to think through it
Hmm.
and stay connected back to the people.
Yeah. Let's talk about, as a leader, how have you been? What do you If you're to give a young, you know, 25-year-old, 30-year-old, who is trying to grow within the organization to a leadership role, what would you say were the steps you had to take? I mean that you knew were intentional about doing all of these things to get to a leadership position. What would you say? If you had to highlight three or four.
I really wish that someone, when I was first starting off my leadership career, had told me, read tons and tons of leadership books.
Hmm.
I really wish somebody had taken me aside and said, and maybe it's because I'm the person that likes to read and develops theories and then practice things. But I think leadership books are such effective resources, right? And not just, leadership books that just paint a beautiful picture, but leadership books that actually give you tools, that actually give you action plans, that actually give you structure of what you can and how you can do it. Because sometimes they tell you the what, but they never tell you how. It
Hmm.
doesn't really, if you don't know, that really doesn't really connect for you, right? So my top leadership author, I told you about Marcus Buckingham, who I love. I also read a lot of John Maxwell. He has written 80 something books on leadership. He is fantastic. Do you
Yeah.
know him?
Yes, I do. I mean, I have
Yeah.
his podcast and his books. One of my regrets when I left Nigeria to Canada was the fact that I left most of my books back in Nigeria, and most of my books were that of John C. Maxwell. So
Oh,
yeah,
fantastic.
yeah.
And really the way that he communicates and the way that he kind of brings you back to, hey, leadership at its core, that's so important. And I really wish I had those resources back when I was starting off my career, or at least somebody took me aside and say, hey, you might want to consider doing this, right? I think that's the most important thing. Number two, I think you got to identify your gaps, right? And you have to be honest with what your gaps are. And
Hmm.
again, think about the people around you that will give you the honest feedback, and will help you plug those gaps. That's super important.
Hmm.
Anyone that tells you that everything is perfect, I don't believe it, right? There's always something about somebody that you can change.
Yes.
Not to say that, you have to take it on all the time, depending on if that person has come into conscious bias or not. But, really and truly, you really need to say, okay, if I'm going to 5 different people when they're telling me the same thing, I got to think, you know, maybe something I need to change, right? So again, it will hurt in the moment. It always hurts, but you have to, think about, getting the feedback, taking it on, and making change. And if you don't know how to make change, because it's super important, if you don't know how to make change, find a mentor that will help you, right? Like, because honestly, mentors are, a lot of people don't talk about how powerful mentors are, but they are super powerful because they've gone through something of a struggle that you've gone through, or they can help you plug those gaps. They can give you, guidance and tools and direction, and most importantly, time, their time, to be able to help you along your personal developmental path. And then I would say, third thing, going back to people you surround yourself with, right? You need to be surround yourself with people that are equally hungry, humble, hardworking, because you need to think about, if that's what you want to be and that's where you want to be, you've got to surround yourself with people that emulate that and believe in that and show up like that every single day.
Hmm. That's powerful reading. I think the reading part is where I see a lot of people, miss it. And and when I say miss it, doesn't mean that they're not doing a good job of being a leader, but getting the fundamentals and understanding how it works. Sometimes people we just wing things. Oh, I'm now in this
Yeah,
position. Okay, so how do we don't really understand what it means to lead, right?
yeah,
And we're just managing our way through. So we just get this stuff, this process. Okay, but how are you leading? So that I think that part of reading is where we miss it, because yeah, we could have men, and mentors also help, getting mentors and having people around you, but also studying for yourself to have a basic understanding, I think is where we miss it a lot, because what you read stays inside of you. And when you want to, most times when we want to respond as leaders is what we already have inside of us that's going to show up, right? And that
Yeah.
comes by reading, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think reading, to me, everybody thinks that reading is just like, oh, why would I be reading? But honestly, to me, it's reading is an important part of preparation, right?
Mm,
When I go into a meeting and I know I need to present, I don't just wing it. I actually spend some time preparing beforehand to say, okay, this is what I need to say. Like, I have my list today of things I want to talk about, right? Like,
mm,
so it's always important to prepare and think about the key things that you want to hit, because you don't want to walk away from a meeting with things left unsaid, especially things that could be impactful,
right,
right? So
right.
you want to spend that time to prepare. You want to think about all the things people around you, like put yourself in the chair of everybody and say, okay, what do you think this person is going to ask? What do you think that person is going to ask? And start to prepare yourself with your answers, even if there will be people that will come with humdingers, right? For
Mm,
sure. But at least you know that you prepared yourself and you can hit at least 80% of their questions through that whole preparation process.
great, great. I want to. I'm thinking of talking about these questions, this talk around, you know, we one of the things that new immigrants and people of color or immigrants in general in new countries tend to they're worried about and they talk a lot about is that they don't find representations,
Mm,
leadership. And so I mean, if I don't see someone that looks like me there, how am I sure I'm even going to get there, right?
yeah.
So how do you, and I know you do a lot. I mean, you showing up on this show shows that you are showing, you're trying to, create the pathway for others, right? So how do you, number one, um, show, lead the way for others to know that it's possible within the organization, especially
Yeah.
immigrant? How do you do that?
You know, Yesterday I was leaving my office. And outside of my office, I saw this guy standing up there, and I was like, okay, hi, are you okay? Everything's okay? And he's like, oh, I came here to look for a job. And I was like, here to look for a job? And I was like, because it was after 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening.
Mm.
And I was interested and said, okay, are you sure you are looking for bond brand loyalty? And oh, can I strike that part out? Can I mention my company or not?
Yeah, yeah, you can.
Okay, totally. So, are you sure you're looking for bond brand loyalty? And he said, yeah, I heard that there were jobs here. And I was like, oh, okay. So it's 6 o'clock. And I obviously can tell through his accent that he's not originally from Canada. And my heart immediately went out to him, because I was thinking, oh, he's in some cultures, it's okay to just take your backpack and say, hey, I heard there's jobs. Let me go and knock on the door and
Right.
see if there's an opening, right? And I spent 5 minutes of my time saying, okay, you have to go online. We have positions open. You can go and apply there. And he's like, oh, okay, what website? So like, and then, I didn't know him at all. But I felt for him, because who knows how many doors he knocked on that day, right? Looking for a job. And who knows what the resources he has access to help him.
Mm.
Maybe I was lucky. I had someone here to, depend on, my aunt, who I'm thankful for all the time and grateful for. But, maybe he doesn't have that, right? Because, anyone that is assimilated into Canadian culture will know that you can't just, go take your backpack and say, hey, I want a job, right?
Mhm.
Or you can, but just not in certain types of industries and certain types of companies, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting, because like when I think about my career and I think about me as a new immigrant coming to Canada, I think about the fact that I probably had it easier than other people. My accent is, you would hardly know that I'm not from Canada unless you hear certain words. You wouldn't know that I'm not from North America. For other people, it may not be as easy,
Right.
right? And I recognize that. And I think we all need to, number one, just if we're new immigrants, we gotta like help others, man. We gotta give it back, give it forward, because honestly, we have to remember that we were in their shoes 10 years ago.
Mhm.
Or we were in their shoes however long ago that we came to Canada, and we have to help others along the way. And for me, it's about sharing my story. It's about telling people, hey, what did I do to move up the career path? Wouldn't say that I'm by any means done, but like, I've had to sacrifice. I've had to, show up bigger, better, and faster than everybody else, right? I've had to do that, and be respectful to, who surrounds me, and the messages that I actually put forward. And am I the most brilliant communicator? I don't think I'm the most brilliant communicator, but I'm definitely someone who wants to, show up and do well and help people do the same, right? So I think for me, I would like to help other immigrants by sharing my story, by telling them how I was successful, and then also realizing that, it's okay to doubt yourself, but just don't stay there, right? Like,
Yeah.
keep pushing yourself forward, keep challenging yourself. There will be tons of rejection, but it just takes one person to say yes, and reach out to, the organizations that can help you. If you're part of, or you have a special skill set, find associations that can help you. They have events, go to events, start to stimulate yourself. And honestly, for a while, you may have to emulate your whoever you want to, whatever leader you want to be, or whoever you want to be, and learn from that and be better, and keep challenging yourself in a different direction, because that's the only way that you grow and learn.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm working on something. I would definitely reach out to you at some point, because I think this whole helping immigrant and all is something that is very dear to my heart. And I'm looking at a program or a session where I'll just bring people who are immigrants, who have gone, who are doing well, who have some success story to share, and just bring them on the platform. Because the more stories we hear of this, I mean, as much as they're good stories, there are also terrible stories that people hear and they get scared. You
Yeah,
hear people get scared even to come in here. And even those that are here, sometimes I work with a lot of immigrants, and sometimes I hear the stories that I'm like, who told you this? Where did you hear this from? So what
yeah,
people hear a lot plays plays a role in how they navigate their way here in Canada. So
yeah.
yeah.
Totally.
Oh,
I've had people from, Africa told me that some recruiters told them to change their names because to make it more easier to pronounce. And I was like, don't
yes,
do that.
yes,
Don't ever do that.
don't do that.
Right?
Like, I
Yeah.
mean, my name, I know people find it difficult, but I said, my name is I'm not going to I have an English name, but I'm not going to use my English name. I'm using my language
Be
name, and
true to yourself.
that's going to be.
Yeah.
So, before you go, I usually ask three final questions from a guest. And you can answer it one word, or you can expatiate on the word. The first question is around what is the one quality that every leader or aspiring leader should develop?
Mm. Empathy.
Mm,
You have to be, you have to put yourself in what other people are going through, because especially now, like,
mm,
the world has changed, right? People are become a lot more aware of um their limits, right? Like, and what how they want their life to be out of COVID, right? And I think the important thing is to, recognize that and always be empathetic to what people are going through, and welcome walk a mile in a man's shoes, and think about, like, how would you want to be treated
true.
in that?
Yeah. I wrote somewhere that with the rise of artificial intelligence, those who are going to succeed at this times and age is those who have a higher emotional intelligence. So as much as we embrace artificial intelligence, we also have to increase in our emotional intelligence. So that sums it up in your response there, empathy. Second question, what is your favorite leadership book that
Oh,
of all time?
John C. Maxwell. Okay. Five Levels of Leadership. I think
Mm,
that was one of my first books that I read from him. And the theories of, going from, positional leadership, which a lot of people rest on,
mhm,
to being like a relational leader, And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've been down here this whole time, right?
Mm,
I need to be up there. I need to think about ways to drive myself forward because that's how you're going to help people succeed. This is how you're going to help drive things forward, right? I
mm,
think that was the aha book for me.
Five Laws of Leadership. Yeah, I don't think I've read that one. I've read the 21, a couple of books I've read about him, but I have to go back into Jesse Maxwell. It's been a while. Yeah. Okay. Last question here would be if you had to give an advice to, you know, new immigrants, young leaders, what would be the one advice that you would want to leave with them?
Create your own opportunities. Don't let don't let no make you question your self-worth
Hmm.
because at time it will. At times it absolutely did for me. It made me want to crawl under a bed and cry. And probably I did do that a couple of times, I'm not gonna lie, because I
Hmm.
thought, oh my gosh, I couldn't see the end in sight, right? So I
Hmm.
think with that, you got to just recognize that if I keep going, it just takes one person to say yes. And once I get that yes, never looking back, right? And then you
Hmm.
just got to throw yourself into it and be loyal to that person because that person giving you a chance is also recognize that for a second. Like, and not to say that you got to work there until you die, right? Like, but there's different ways you can show loyalty. And I think it's super important to recognize and be grateful for that.
Right. You mentioned loyalty. I think that's also where you work. The name.
Yes.
Okay, what a beautiful way to wrap things up here. It's been a great time having you on the show, Eva. I hope that when next we invite you, and I have something I'm working on, and that would involve a lot of leaders that immigrants to be part of. So when we reach out to you, I hope that you have the time and the availability to be there for us.
I will make the time. Thank you so much for actually having me here. It's honestly been fantastic, and I appreciate that.